What's up, everybody? Been a while since I've done a video. Thought I'd do a video on this 2004 Dodge Ram 2500, the 5.7 Hemi. Hoping this video helps a few of you Dodge owners out there that are experiencing a crank no start. Might also have a couple of codes like a P0129, barometric pressure sensor, a P0340 has to do with the cam sensor. Also, you might have a little red lightning bolt that illuminates on the right side of the instrument cluster. That red lightning bolt, by the way, just basically telling you that you've got something wrong with the electronic throttle body system, being that there's not a throttle cable that operates the throttle body. It's all done electronically. It's called fly-by-wire. Anyways, my intention for this video is to keep people from throwing parts at their truck. Because I'm going to tell you right now, the cam sensor code and the barometric pressure sensor code, those parts are not what's wrong with this truck, nor were they replaced. I'm going to show you exactly what I replaced and how I narrowed it down. And it's pretty easy, a little time consuming. You need nothing really special. You need a voltmeter, really, is all you need. Any old voltmeter will work, and I hope you know how to use one, because it's going to make this a lot easier. Being that one of the codes was a cam sensor, which cam sensor sits right underneath the alternator, right there. It's held on by a 10mm bolt, and this is a harness. Now, the crazy thing is, with this truck and this setup, not only is the cam sensor, the throttle body, the barometric pressure sensor, which is in the very front of the intake manifold between the alternator and AC compressor, and then your oil pressure switch right down there, and then the crank sensor, which is back underneath on the passenger side. All those sensors are ran off the same ground of the PCM. And it can, if one or two of these sensors or something else is going crazy, it can trigger codes associated with parts that aren't necessarily bad. So what I started with, I wanted to make sure I had proper voltage at the cam sensor. And the way you do that is this connector here. Let me grab it. You've got two blue wires, one's in the middle, and you get the yellow wire. The outside blue wire is your power wire. You want to make sure you have 5 volts coming from inside that terminal with the key on or the engine cranking. If this engine was running, you should still have 5 volts out of there. But being that this engine was a crank no start, we could just do key on and crank. Well, I had 5 volts coming from this wire with the key on and even having my helper crank the engine. I had them shut the ignition off, take the key out to see if voltage would drop. Voltage never dropped. I still had a constant 5 volts coming out of this wire. So I knew somewhere there was going to be a short to ground. There was something was shorting out. I didn't know if it was something in the wiring. I didn't know if it was going to be in the PCM, which would really suck. So I just kept chugging away, and I'm going to show you how to do it. So you want to leave that connector undone from the cam position sensor. The next one that I tested was the barometric pressure sensor. And all you got to do is you got to get like a little flathead and push that red tab out, in which will let you push this middle gray tab, release tab down, and you can slide that off. And I don't remember what terminal it was I tested for voltage on here. I don't remember if it was the left or the middle or the right, but either way, you're going to find out which one's a power wire, because with that blue wire having 5 volts, one of those wires is going to be hot as well, so to speak. The best thing to do with a voltmeter, before I get too far ahead, is you want the black lead, the ground. If you can get it somehow to sit inside the ground on the battery, that's your best ground. Just so you know for sure you've got a good ground, and then obviously you use the red lead to test for power. I know a lot of you out there know how to use a voltmeter. That's basically for people who are still learning or have never done it. So being that I still had power at the barometric pressure sensor and I left it unhooked, even though it's hooked up now, but keep it unhooked. Go to your throttle body and pull it off. I mean, I already have it off just to kind of show you how it comes off. There's this tab here, and you pull it back with your thumb. It's kind of a pain, but once you get it, you can kind of wiggle it off. It might be a little hard to come off just because dirt and stuff gets trapped in there and dust, and it just kind of makes it hard. But anyways, this lower wire here, it looks like pink, even though it's supposed to be red. It says number 2 on it. It's going to be the top left terminal. You want to test for voltage there. Well, I had voltage there, even with the key out of the ignition. I didn't even bother having my helper turn the ignition forward, because if I had power constant right there, and I had power constant right there, I knew that these parts was not going to be what's causing this mess. As you can see, I have a lot of the wiring exposed for the cam position sensor. And I only did that because there are some people out there who have said that this is a loom that the wire sits in. Sometimes it can rub up against the valve cover, and if you get, especially that power wire, you get that insulation rubbed off and it touches that, it's gonna short out, you know. But I just wanted to check the wiring on that. You don't necessarily have to expose any of that wiring. You want to do this diagnostic that I'm showing you right now before you start going chasing wires, because right now you're just testing voltage at the right parts. So now that we've tested voltage at the cam sensor, barometric pressure sensor, the throttle body, the oil pressure sensor is kind of tied into that. I didn't mess with that because it's a single wire setup. I had a feeling there was going to be something else, so I didn't mess with that, and I don't think you really need to either. So the next sensor that you're going to want to test is a crank sensor, and this is where it gets kind of crazy. Let me get under here. I'm running out a little bit of daylight here, but I got a flashlight. Your crank sensor. Hold on. Crank sensor sits right there above the oil pan on the passenger side and sits right in front of the transmission. 10 millimeter bolt holds that thing on. Now, what I want to show you is this is the connector that goes on that crank sensor. And to release it, you want to push this red tab out. I used a flathead screwdriver. Let me see if I can get a good shot in there, but you kind of see there's like some red in there. You just push the flathead into that red spot to move that tab out, and then you can use this release tab to pull it off. So once I had that off, I went back up and I tested power at the blue wire on the cam sensor. With the key still out of the ignition, I had 0 volts at that wire. I went to all the other sensors that I had unplugged, tested voltage there. I had 0 voltage at all those sensors. And before I jumped and said, oh, well, it's got to be a bad crank sensor, I wanted to make sure that with me moving this harness, which has the crank position sensor, or the crank sensor harness in it, and it runs up on top of the bell housing and transmission. You can't really see because it's dark. I wanted to make sure I just didn't move a wire just right to move it away from metal or whatever it was. So I took the crank sensor out, which is like I said, a 10 millimeter bolt holds it in, and then you can twist it and pull it right out. And I'll show you what that looks like and how to test it, just to be 100% sure that you've got a bad crank sensor. And I went ahead and picked one up from the parts store earlier because I didn't want to have to run down there a second time because I was already down there today. But this is the part number that I got. I got it from Advanced Auto Parts, BWD, pretty decent. I mean, for what it is, you can go with a factory Mopar one if you want. They're going to be a little bit more pricier. But I'm going to show you how you test your crank sensors. As you can see, this is the old one, obviously. This is a new one. And when I put this new one in, the truck fired right up. But I'm going to show you how I tested to just, for peace of mind myself, to make sure that we had a bad sensor. So take your voltmeter, and as you can see, I have it on an ohms reading, and I have it on 20K. You've got your black and red lead, and you want the sensor to sit just like this. You want the mounting hole to be facing, I guess, basically away from you. You want the black lead to go on the far left terminal. And then you want the red lead to go in the middle terminal. And try not to get them to touch, because you're not going to get a very good reading if you do that. It'll be a lot crazier reading. So let's do that. You can see I've got 10.39 of the resistance of a continuity, basically. That's pretty high for just one of those sensors. So let's do it on the new one. When I did the new one, 3.73. So that means that the old sensor has more than twice the resistance. Something inside this sensor is shorting out. Not sure where, don't care. All I know is this part is what is causing my crank no start, and also causing that barometric pressure sensor for some reason to have a low voltage, which I'm not sure why that was. You would think it would have a higher voltage just with this being shorted out. But basically, you know, this shows you right here that a part that was replaced that had no trouble codes associated with this, because we just had the cam sensor and the barometric pressure sensor code, and it turned out what fixed this truck was a crank sensor. So there's a lot of people out there. I was reading on some forums that replaced cam sensor and the barometric pressure sensor, disconnected their battery and hooked it back up, and still same thing, crank no start. Well, here you go. This was something that didn't even have a code, and it turned out fixing this thing. So I'm hoping this video helps a lot of you Dodge Ram owners out there that have this type of setup, that experience a crank no start. It just goes to show that just because you get codes for certain parts doesn't mean that those parts are bad. Don't forget to plug all your stuff in, or you're not going to have a running vehicle. So anyways, if this video was any help to any of you out there, please hit the like and subscribe, and hopefully I'll have some more videos up here soon of some other vehicles I have waiting to get worked on, and I will catch you guys on the next one.